Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hello, this is Ray Gerard. Welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. This is the program that asks, what if St. Paul were alive today? What if, looking at what is happening in our country today, he could write a letter to America? What would he tell us? Well, here on this program, we give you precisely such a letter. We then utilize that letter for an in-depth discussion of an issue that is current in our lives and our society today. We look at it through the eyes of St. Paul. As we discuss these matters, we always bear a motto in mind: love and kindness through the light of truth. And hopefully that is what we do here. Now today we have as our topic the Satanic Temple versus the state of Missouri. There's an organization called the Satanic Temple, and they have sued the state of Missouri. It seems that a temple member got pregnant and wanted an abortion. She went to the Planned Parenthood clinic in St. Louis and tried to get that abortion. They, following state law, gave her a certain pamphlet and told her she would have to wait 72 hours. She said she would waive that requirement. She didn't need to wait the 72 hours. She would waive this and not hold the Planned Parenthood clinic responsible and just please go on with the abortion, but they refused. They said, no, we need to abide by the state law. Her real problem was the fact that the brochure that she was given to take home said, quote, "The life of each human being begins at conception," close quote. She did not agree with that statement. She actually felt that when the state gives her that pamphlet and forces her to wait 72 hours with that pamphlet in her possession, basically compelling her, if you will, in a sense, to read this, that they are imposing a religious belief on her, that they're imposing religion on her, and that she objected to that, and that we're supposed to be free from any kind of government compelled religion, and so she sued. She filed it in federal district court, and it was dismissed. Recently, she just filed an appeal of that case to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, where it is now pending. So that is the issue with which we are going to concern this program. And in relation to that, we submit to you this letter from St. Paul to America. Brothers and sisters, I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts may be corrupted from a sincere and pure commitment to Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan masquerades as an angel of light. So it is not strange that his ministers also masquerade as ministers of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. The lawless one, the one who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God and object of worship, so as to seat himself in the temple of God, is already at work. But we give thanks to God always, because God chose you for salvation through sanctification by the Spirit and belief in truth. To this end, he has also called you through our gospel to possess the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, brothers, stand firm and hold fast to the traditions that you were taught. May our Lord Jesus Christ himself and our God and Father, who has loved us, encourage your hearts and strengthen them. Now, this letter is a little bit of a creation, a little bit of a fabrication, in that it is a compilation of pieces of letters actually written by St. Paul. This one, combination of things found in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, and his second letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 2. But they expressed St. Paul's ideas about people who pretend to be ministers of righteousness, although they are actually performing the will of Satan. He talks about lawlessness, and he also talks about the fact that we are called for something higher, that there is in fact a God who loves us, and he reminds us that we're called for salvation. We're called to share as co-heirs in the glory of Christ, the promise of Christ, the rest of the eternal life made possible by Christ. So now, with that letter as our backdrop, we're going to consider what the Satanic Temple proposes instead. Now, they filed this lawsuit, like I said, with the district court, who then dismissed it. And the reasons they dismissed it were perhaps that they agreed with a memorandum filed by the Attorney General for the state of Missouri in connection with the state's motion to dismiss. For one thing, the state noted that this woman, the woman who's the aggrieved party here, was not pregnant at the time that the lawsuit was filed. Now, that's a problem from the perspective of what we call standing. When someone comes to a court, they need to stand before a court and ask for a decision in their favor. They need to have some problem that has to be fixed. If there's no problem, there's nothing for the court to even do. And in this particular case, if you're not pregnant, how could it be a problem? But more to the point, at least more to the point for our purposes, the Attorney General argues that the plaintiff in this case doesn't have a case. They said that the plaintiffs do not cite a single opinion, single court decision, where it was held that a state's expression of a value judgment is equal to an establishment of religion. This woman is claiming that the state is forcing religion upon her because there was a statement in a pamphlet that human life begins at conception. And that's really a religious belief, and that they're forcing that religious belief on her instead of honoring the principle of separation of church and state. Now, the plaintiffs, the Satanic Temple, did, however, say that the Eighth Circuit, the Court of Appeals above this district court, has already found that this type of action that was performed by the state, or that is relevant here, this type of action was an impermissible state adoption of religion. And they cited a particular case that was decided 26 years ago. There's only one problem. As the Attorney General pointed out, that decision by the Eighth Circuit was actually reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. And in that case, the court held that Roe versus Wade, the very famous court decision that held abortion was legal in America, the Webster case, this case from 26 years ago, held that Roe versus Wade implies no limitation on the authority of a state to make a value judgment favoring childbirth over abortion. So that's a small, little problem. States make value judgments all the time. Whenever you pass a law, you're making a value judgment. If you pass a law, like New York just did, that cats cannot be declawed, it's because you've made a value judgment that declawing cats is not kind to the cats. If you pass a law that in the city of New York that 32-ounce sodas are not allowed, it's because you've made a value judgment that too much sugar is not good for you. States make value judgments all the time. They have to be allowed to make value judgments. So the courts have held that that something like what the state of Missouri is doing here, giving someone a pamphlet that says, that human life begins at conception, that's simply a value judgment. It's not actually forcing religion on you. And so, if this line of thinking holds up, which it would seem like it should, the prospects for the Satanic Temple winning this case later on down the road might not seem very bright. But and there's actually there's a further reason why their chances aren't particularly good. In addition to filing a lawsuit in federal court, in a very similar type of situation, they tried to tear down this Missouri law by filing a lawsuit in state court. It seems that in February 2015, remember, the Satanic Temple tried the same thing. And they filed a lawsuit basically making the same complaint that they're doing in federal court. It went up to the Supreme Court for the state of Missouri, and they similarly held that the Missouri Informed Consent Law does not adopt any religious tenet, because the law does not require that anybody even read the booklet. They just require Planned Parenthood or any abortion clinic to give out the pamphlet. The Chief Justice for the Missouri Supreme Court declared that the U.S. Supreme Court, quote, has made it clear that state speech is not religious speech solely because it happens to coincide with a religious tenet, which makes perfect sense, because how many religious tenets are there out there? How many different religions are there out there? If any time a state makes a law and some expression of a value that's embedded in that law happens to coincide with something that some religion happens to believe, that all of a sudden you have a problem, hard to understand how many laws would survive that. But in any event, but they keep trying. They keep trying to knock this law down. And why? Well, obviously they believe in the unfettered right to abortion, and they believe that human life does not begin at conception. So, and if that position is allowed to hold, that does have ramifications for our society as a whole. The devaluation of human life itself is at stake. And Marco Rubio at one point happened to say, I'm reading from an article that appeared in the Washington Post, and he said, "Science is settled." He told this apparently to Sean Hannity on a television show. I think maybe it was a radio show. In any event, he said, "Science is settled." He said, "Human life begins at conception." He claimed that there was a consensus of scientists that had basically determined that to be the case. So the writers of this article in the Washington Post, however, thought that Mr. Rubio had made a mistake, that he had gotten his science wrong. So they went to the American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists, and they spoke with their executive vice president and CEO, a fellow by the name of Hal Lawrence, and they said that, the article said that there's a blurry line between pregnancy and life. When they asked this particular CEO if pregnancy and life were interchangeable, we were told that the organization approaches everything from a scientific perspective, and as such, our definition is for what pregnancy begins. See, the response they got from this executive vice president was that pregnancy begins 5 to 9 days after conception. That the pregnancy doesn't begin until there is implantation of a fertilized egg into the lining of a woman's uterus, and that's when pregnancy begins. And the writers for this piece in the Washington Post went back and said, well, okay, but wait a minute. Are these two interchangeable? Is there a difference between pregnancy and life, and the beginning of life? And basically the response they got was simply, look, our definition is only for when pregnancy begins. That's all we're talking about. So obviously they didn't even answer the question of when life begins. They went to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, spoke to their executive vice president, and CEO, and he couldn't tell them. He couldn't give them an answer, or perhaps would not. The Washington Post writers then said, well, scientific experts didn't offer any consensus. And they attempted to correct Senator Rubio, who said that there was a consensus, even though the only source that they referenced in this article, the only source, they apparently spoke with only one person, and the only source didn't even answer the question. Well, there is more information on this, however. If you go to the American Heritage Dictionary, there's a piece written by a gentleman by the name of James Agresti, president of a group called Just Facts, a nonprofit institute dedicated to researching and publishing verifiable facts about public policy. And he wrote an article in response to this Washington Post piece. And he said, if you look to the American Heritage Dictionary of Science, American Heritage Dictionary of Science, it defines life as a form of existence. It's an animate existence characterized by growth, reproduction, metabolism, and response to stimuli. Well, if nothing else, a human embryo is bound to grow. And then and for that and for the other elements of this particular definition, they quoted textbooks like The Essentials of Human Development, a Lifespan View, Per Human Sexuality Encyclopedia, another one, a medical text, well, you get the idea. They went to various medical textbooks and found all of these elements of that definition satisfied. But in any event, besides that, you could go to a statement made by Faye Waddleton. She was the longest reigning president of Planned Parenthood. And in 1997, 22 years ago, in Ms. Magazine, she said, I think we have deluded ourselves into believing that people don't know that abortion is killing. Or you could go to Anne Ferruti. She was the chief executive of the largest independent abortion business in the United Kingdom. And in 2008, she said, we can accept that the embryo is a living thing in the fact that it has a beating heart, that it has its own genetic system within it. It's clearly human in the sense that it's not a gerbil, and we can recognize that it is a human life. There's a prominent feminist, her name was Naomi Wolf. She basically said that we need a moral framework that admits that the death of a fetus is a real death. She had no illusions that abortion is actually killing. She just said we just need a moral framework where we can justify it. Peter Singer, another abortion advocate, said that it is possible to give human being a precise meaning. The term human being, we can precisely define it. We can use it, he said, we can use it as an equivalent to member of the species Homo sapiens. Whether a being is a member of a given species is something that can be determined scientifically by examination of the nature of the chromosomes in the cells of the living organism. In this sense, there is no doubt that from the first moments of an existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and egg is a human being. Or we can go to Bernard Nathanson, co-founder of NARAL. He was one of the gentlemen who was directly responsible, principally responsible for the Roe versus Wade decision itself. And a doctor, as a matter of fact, the medical director for the largest abortion clinic in America in the 1970s. And in 1974, he wrote in probably the most respected journal of medicine in the U.S., the New England Journal of Medicine, he wrote, quote, this is 1974, quote, there is no longer serious doubt in my mind that human life exists within the womb from the very onset of pregnancy. Some years later, he would also write that all its genetic coding and all its features are indisputably human. As to being, there is no doubt that it exists, is alive, is self-directed, and it is not the same being as the mother, and is therefore a unified whole. Even Margaret Sanger, the woman responsible for the move towards contraception, the move that has the movement that resulted years later in Roe versus Wade. She wrote in 1932, I quote, no new life begins unless there is conception, close quote. And what does all of this amount to? It all amounts to the obvious. It amounts to the obvious. Every human being starts out as an embryo. The statement in the pamphlet read, human life begins at conception. So it's not life? It's not alive? Well, then what is it? If it's not alive, then it's dead. If it's dead, how can it possibly grow and become a human life? A full-grown human, this is all the obvious. And even the proponents of abortion admit it's the obvious. They admit that to try to argue the otherwise is a losing argument. It doesn't make any sense. So why is the Satanic Temple, another abortion advocate, why are they pushing it? Why are they pushing it? Well, for that, we might want to understand a little bit about who is the Satanic Temple. The obvious next question is, who are they? And if you go to, I guess you can start out with the name, the Satanic Temple. Why pick that name? Why? I ask why because what you would normally think that name means, what you would normally think that it means, it doesn't. They proclaim loudly and repeatedly that they are not theistic. They don't believe in God. It's not that they hate God. This is according to them. It's not that they hate God or they disagree with God or that they rebel against God, as Satan did. They proclaim that there is no God. There's nothing to hate. They proclaim that they do not believe in a supernatural being called Satan. They don't even believe in a supernatural being called Satan. So why the name? Well, according to them, it's just a symbol. Satan was a rebel. And they like to say that they are rebelling against dominance, against authoritarianism. They want to hold up the sovereignty of the individual person. Well, no one has complete sovereignty. If we did, we'd have chaos. Everybody's got to be subservient to something. We've got to be subservient to the laws, just laws passed by the state. We've got to be subservient to legal requirements from our employers. Children should be, hopefully, subservient to good guidance from their parents. Everybody's subservient to somebody at some time. But they don't believe, they are champions for what they say is personal sovereignty. So they pick a name, even though they don't believe in Satan, the being Satan, they pick a name that refers to this being Satan. Why? Why? Well, obviously it's to jab people, it's to create attention. And possibly, just possibly, it could be because they're not as atheistic as they proclaim to be. But that would mean that they're not being perfectly truthful. And far be it from people who call themselves Satanists, to believe that anything other than perfect honesty should be the rule. But in any event, going a little bit further, if you go to their website, you'll find things like they have a series of images. You go to the main page on their website, and the first thing you see is a series of images, a slideshow sort of series of images. And in one of them, there's about half a dozen of them, and in one of them you see an upside-down cross. On another one, fire with a satanic pentagram along with it, symbol of Satan worship. Another one, there's a person who's standing with a sign that says, "No knee will bend." Now that is contra another letter from St. Paul, chapter 2 from his letter to the Philippians, where he said that because of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, God greatly exalted him. Oh, and by the way, what he talks about in this letter to the Philippians is that he became obedient to death. Jesus Christ was obedient to the will of the Father, even to the point of death. Obedience. And of course, one thing that the Satanic Temple would admit to, they don't believe in obedience to people they don't agree with. But Christ was obedient. And because of his sacrifice on the cross, because of this obedience, God greatly exalted him. According to the second letter to the Philippians, God greatly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bend, of those in heaven and on earth and under the earth. And every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Every knee under the earth, every knee in all creation, including the devils. But this gentleman, a member of the Satanic Temple, has a placard that loudly proclaims, "No knee will bend." Now, you can still maintain that they're just countering the Bible. They don't really believe in the Bible, but other people do, so they're just countering what other people believe, I suppose. But they feel a need to declare things that are anti-Christian. Of course, they declare things that are anti-Christian. They believe in no religion at all. There's another gentleman who has a placard that says, "Hail thyself." That letter from St. Paul that we started with talked about people who were lawless. And here we've got people that they believe in personal sovereignty. They believe in nobody being able to impinge on their freedom. They want themselves to be their own masters. If everybody was personally sovereign, there would be lawlessness. But in any event, he talks about, this letter that we started with, talks about the fact that the lawless one, the one who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God and object of worship, exalts himself. And this gentleman has a placard that reads, "Hail thyself." And another gentleman, "No knee will bend." They're exalting themselves above Christ, exalting themselves above any kind of a God. They are taking the place of God. This letter from St. Paul talks about these people who seat themselves in the temple of God. Well, they're doing that. They're certainly doing that. They got recognition from the IRS that they are now a religion. That's another thing that they've accomplished. They've gotten recognition as a religion. But they believe in no God. They are putting themselves in the place of God. They respect, they worship the human being, the human creature, and that is what they worship. Now, if we want to find out basically what they do believe in, we could go to the page on the website where they refer to their 7 fundamental tenets. And a lot of them are couched in these 3 principles: compassion, wisdom, and justice. Compassion is certainly not evil or mean. Wisdom and justice. Well, justice, of course, St. Paul talked about these people pretending to be ministers of righteousness. But these compassion, wisdom, and justice, these sound very good. They sound very good. Could this be a masquerade? Could this be a masquerade? Well, let's look at some of the other tenets. They say that the struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. So what are they saying? They're proclaiming, in effect, lawlessness. They're extolling disobedience. The struggle for justice should prevail over laws and institutions. So if they feel that they're being unjustly treated, but nevertheless, the law by which they are being unjustly treated was the result of the will of a majority of the people in a given state or country. If they feel that their sense of justice should prevail over that law, then what they want should prevail, their sense of justice should prevail over the sense of justice of the majority. So this is, in a way, justifying disobedience. And it contains a good deal of self-righteous pride. And what is pride if it's not the very heart of Satan? He disobeyed God. He was the reason for the fall, the original fall. He disobeyed. He would not submit. And that's why when Christ came into the world, it began with Mary saying that she submits to the will of God. Obviously, just a different perspective, a different reality. It's a different direction for the world. They also say that the spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice. In other words, what somebody feels should always prevail over the written or spoken word. Probably the most famous written word is the Bible. Other written words would be the laws. So again, we're talking about prevailing, a spirit feelings prevailing over authoritative principles. Obviously, if it's written, it's got to be some type of authoritative principle. But they allow themselves the ability to prevail over that. There is disobedience contained in here. Oh, another one of their tenets. The freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. What are they talking about? They're talking about the freedom to go ahead and tell faithful people, religious people, that they're wrong, perhaps stupid, whatever. But they can offend them. They can offend their sensibilities. They can come with satanic images and so forth that are very offensive to many people and bring them out in public, try to get them installed on public lands as they have done in the past. They can offend people. But it says that the freedoms of others should be respected, and that's an important caveat. The freedoms of others should be respected. Not that, why not just simply say others should be respected? So they're maintaining for themselves the freedom to offend other people, not to respect other people, only to respect other people's freedoms. It doesn't sound all that compassionate. So those are some of their tenets. What else? Well, if you go to their website and you look to their frequently asked questions, you'll find statements, as I say, that they in fact they don't believe in anything supernatural. If someone asks whether or not they promote evil, they say that no, the Satanic Temple holds to the basic premise that undue suffering is bad. We do not believe in symbolic evil. In other words, they don't believe when they say symbolic evil. What they're talking about is that evil is a symbol. That's not real. Evil is associated with the creature, Satan. Evil is associated with something that has existed for all time, whereas humans, we just live moment to moment. We're the products of evolution. Our morals are the products of random evolution. Our values, the products of random evolution, and so forth. There is no evil that exists all by itself. There's no incarnate. There's no spiritual evil of sorts. So they don't believe in that, but they believe that only undue suffering is bad. So they admit that there is some suffering. But if there's suffering, their suffering is a suffering that is not connected to God. So there is some suffering, but there's no purpose for it. There's no reason for it. It's not connected. It's not connected to God. We're told that the greatest sacrifice a person can give, the greatest, is to give up one's life. That's of course in the Bible. That's of course referring to, that's what Christ has said. That's the example that he gave. It's the mark of absolute love. But here, suffering is not going to be connected with any kind of love. What's the reason for it? So the suffering with no reason, that's depressing. And it could lead, certainly, to depression. Let's see, their definition of religion. What do they say religion is? They proclaim themselves religion. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in the devil, but they believe that they are a religion. Why? According to them, a religion is nothing more than something that provides a narrative structure by which people give context to their lives. It also provides a body of symbolism, it also provides a sense of identity, culture, community, and shared values. Well, if that's a religion, then there's probably hundreds of thousands of things that could qualify as a religion. A sense of culture, shared values, that could describe just about anything. Religion, hopefully, should be something more than that. Religion, I suppose one, just off the top of my head, very simplistic definition of religion, would at least include the ability to give meaning to life, something that's got to give meaning and purpose to life. And that they cannot do. If you don't believe in something beyond this world, and all there is what happens here and now, and when we die, there's nothing more, then there is no meaning to anything. Now, they ask, one of their frequently asked questions, what are some of the rituals of TST, of the Satanic Temple? Well, they say they don't have any required rituals, but some of our members practice things like a black mass, an unbaptism, where people who have been baptized and have their lives consecrated to Christ renounce it. They try to be unbaptized. Why would you want to talk about rebelling? Talk about being just like Satan. Also, a black mass. They don't require it, but some of their members practice it. This sounds a whole lot like, we're going to say one thing and do another. We don't believe in Satan, but we call ourselves the Satanic Temple. We don't require any rituals, but yeah, some of our guys do that. I mean, come on, really. There is a chapter of the Satanic Temple in Canada. As a matter of fact, it's not only it's going to be holding a black mass, the first organized black mass, public black mass in Canadian history. That's going to be held very soon. And, oh, by the way, they got the approval of the Temple's National Council, the Satanic Temple's National. There's only one city, there's only one chapter in all of Canada. There's about 17 cities in the U.S. that have these, with their headquarters, and their headquarters is in Salem, Massachusetts. Yes, that Salem, Massachusetts, where they had the witch trials in the 1600s. They got the approval for this black mass from the Satanic Temple's National Council. So they can say they don't require these things, but they obviously approve them. Come on, who are we kidding here? Oh, so what is a black... Why would you even call it a mass? What is a mass? Mass, obviously, you read the Word of God. You read the scriptures from the Old and the New Testament. You then have a homily where a priest will interpret those particular readings for you. And then you have the liturgy of the Eucharist, where the sacrifice on the cross is remembered. And then in the miracle of transubstantiation, normal bread and wine is transformed into the very presence of Christ himself. They renounce all. A black mass is to deny all of that, is to perform the opposite of all of that. Over the centuries, black masses have included demon worship, the actual worship of Satan, deviant sex, and even child sacrifices. Oh, but the proponents of this mass in Canada say, oh, now wait a minute, we're not going to sacrifice any children. Well, that's comforting. They don't believe in any harm to people. Well, that's comforting. There's a lecturer, there's a specialist in modern religious Satanism at Concordia University, which is in Montreal. And she said that most of the people in this group, most of these modern Satanists, most of them are atheists. But she said even those that aren't atheists still aren't conceiving of Satan as a cosmic evil. Well, what do you even conceive him as? Let me get this straight. You're not an atheist. I mean, she's trying to defend this group in a sense, trying to maintain this position that they take, that they are not theistic, that they don't believe in anything supernatural. And so she said, well, that's true for most of them. Most of them are atheists. That is true for most of them. But even those that aren't, okay, well, if you're not an atheist, then you believe in God, believe in Satan, believe in the devil. But even those that aren't, they still don't conceive of Satan as a cosmic evil. What's left? I mean, a cosmic evil. So we're not supernatural. Isn't that an atheist? Trying to defend this just runs into one inconsistency after another. But the black masses are not dead. I mean, just a few years ago, a group at Harvard University tried to hold a black mass, but it was canceled after there was a public outcry. They can say that they don't require anybody to perform demon worship. But who are we kidding? A bunch of the people that are going to belong to this group would probably ascribe to this. Because if you didn't, why call yourselves a Satanic Temple? Oh, it's just a metaphor. It really doesn't mean anything. Excuse me, Satan was called the father of all lies. Does it not sound like you're being lied to? If you really wanted to just be a rebellious group, why not call yourselves the Rebellious Club of America? I mean, Saul Alinsky, who wrote, the Bible for, radicals and people who were, rebel. He thought, a rebel, was not enough. You had to be a radical. What did he call it? He wrote two main books: Reveille for Radicals and Rules for Radicals. He didn't. He at one point, used the name Lucifer, and there's debate about whether or not it was tongue in cheek or something more than that. But he said that because Lucifer was a rebel. Well, why not just use the word rebel? Why not just use the word radical like Alinsky did? Why do you got to use the word Satan? It's if you're going to believe that all the members of the Satanic Temple, who are now beginning to perform black masses with the approval of the National Council in Salem, that if you're going to believe that none of this involves demon worship or the devil, I got some land in China to sell you. By the way, so the Satanic Temple is growing. As I said, they got 17 chapters here in the U.S. They've also got chapters located in the U.K., Australia. I mentioned Canada. They also have one in Germany. They claim to have 100,000 members. Who knows? But that's what they claim. And they seem to be growing. Why? Because people don't fear them. People don't think that there's anything terribly wrong with it. As I said, the IRS, recognizes them now as a religion, as a charitable religious organization. And other people are beginning to form views that are not that shocked by the Satanic Temple. They have a new movie out. It's called Hail Satan. Well, of course it's called Hail Satan, but he's just a metaphor. Anyways, Hail Satan is the name of this documentary. And it premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It's gotten various reviews. One that they're appearing in the HollywoodReporter.com uses words like wickedly funny, fascinating, and a crowd pleaser. He talked about the people in the Satanic Temple as, at least from what he saw in this movie, as basically liberal humanists. And he talked about them basically he said they're awesome. And at the very end of his article, he said, "Sign me up and send me to Baphomet." I think that's how you pronounce it. Baphomet is this religious symbol of some half man, half animal creature with a goat's head, horns, the whole 9 yards, very satanic looking. He said, "Sign me up and send me 2 Baphomet T-shirts for the kids." Oh, so Satanism is cool now. Let's see. In Entertainment Weekly, Hail Satan says there aren't many documentarians who can claim they've made a movie which turns people into Satanists. But Hail Satan director Penny Lane is one of them. According to Lane, she says people feel really inspired and empowered after seeing the movie. A lot of people walk out with this kind of puzzled, perplexed look on their face, and they're saying to their friend, "I think I might be a Satanist." Why? Because, well, they portrayed themselves as people who are just fighting for social justice. They're just fighting for freedom and for the government not to impose things on people. And that's all they're really doing. And they're not really about worshiping the devil. No, none of that at all. And so they come out sounding as just fighters against injustice. And like I said, not involving the devil at all. St. Paul warned us of people who masquerade as ministers of righteousness. And they said they're non-theistic. They're just completely atheistic, nothing spiritual about them. And yet now we have the first approved black mass in Canada. Sure. And that black mass, that's going to be perfectly secular. There's not going to be anything God-oriented or anti-God in it. They're not going to be any upside-down crosses. They're not going to be, any anti-Christian statements of any kind. If you were completely atheistic, why is there a need to vilify Christ and Christians with any kind of anger or hostility? Give me a break. You don't have hostility to Christ. It's something that doesn't even exist if there is no God. Let's see. There's another magazine called The Stylist. And in this one, it says, in reviewing this movie, it says, by the time you finished reading this review, you might be tempted to join the Satanic Temple. It quotes a member of the Satanic Temple as saying that Satanists, they're not anti-Christian. They're pluralists, accepting of all religions. Really? Really? Why the upside-down cross? Why? Like, for example, there's a group that is promoting Satanist education in the schools as a reaction to some Bible group that was promoting Christianity in the schools. And they referred to that Christian organization as an insidious organization. And as far as the good news of the gospel, they referred to this the loathsome stink of the good news. There is hostility towards Christ in a big way. Why is that even necessary if he doesn't exist? If you look at the trailer to this documentary, it opens with a man. He's all dressed in black. He's wearing plastic horns on his head, like that of a goat. He's heckled by somebody who says, "You go to hell." And then he replies, "I believe in it, and I am very excited about it." Sounds very secular to me. Excited about going to hell. He believes in hell, and he's excited about it. Another member explains the purposes of fighting against Christianity creeping into our government. Another person says that the U.S. is not a Christian nation. Another one says, we do indeed invoke Satan. Oh, really? I thought that's exactly what they didn't do. And at the end of this little 2-minute trailer, there are chants of Hail Satan to a background chorus of the Hallelujah from Handel's Messiah. Not anti-Christian, pluralist, secular. They don't believe in evil or worshiping the devil. They just simply fight for freedom and justice. That's all they want to do. There's nothing to fear from them. Oh, please, won't you come and join us? What does this sound like? This simply sounds like the greatest lie. What does Satan want people to believe the most? What would make, suppose for a minute, because it does happen to be true, because in fact Christ talked about the devil, because in fact Christ was real. So suppose, because it's real, for a minute, that there is a Satan, there is a devil. What would make him happy? What would make him happy? What would make him happy beyond anything else is that we didn't believe in him. Because then we wouldn't fear him. We wouldn't be on our guard against him. He would be able to lie and deceive and corrupt. St. Paul, the letter that we gave, warned about people being corrupted. He would be able to lie and deceive and corrupt, and we wouldn't even know it. This is the greatest lie ever told. The greatest story ever told is Christ. The greatest lie ever told is not that there is Satan and that he's good, but that there is no Satan. And that's what these people, the Satanic Temple, are trying to make you believe they believe. Why? We'll go back to the question we had earlier. Why even call yourselves Sists? Why? It's just a metaphor. It's just a symbol. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean, really. There is a disturbing trend, a very disturbing trend, along with, there was one member of the Satanic Temple who said something about most of their people are joining up, do not come because people in society today do not come from a background of religion. And that's true. That's perfectly accurate. We are taking God out of our society. And as we do that, we make ourselves more susceptible to people like, to these people. We're making it possible for people to join this group without really their principles as we should. We make it possible by giving government approval for this organization. If there was really belief in God in our culture, would the IRS declare this group a charitable religious group? What does religion mean anymore? What does Christianity mean? Christianity means something. I mean, it stands for altruism. It stands for sacrificing for other people. It's not all about yourself. It's about the other person first. It's first and foremost about love, not about yourself. These people are all about themselves first. It's all about the individual. They say that. They want to tell you that they're full of compassion and so forth. But philosophically, their core beliefs run counter to that. And what the heck are we talking about? There was a Christ. He died on the cross, and he rose again. St. Paul tells us that there were at least 500 witnesses to the risen Christ. People died in the Roman Colosseum because of what? A superstition? It conquered the Roman Empire without force. Christianity, the life of Christ was a pivotal moment in the history of this world. And, I mean, we don't even begin to, the time that it would take to list all the miracles wrought through Christ by the saints throughout the centuries. How many more indications, just the life of one saint alone, St. Padre Pio, would convince you, if you looked at it honestly and openly, with the number of miracles that he participated in. There's so much evidence. Christ was real. He is real. And there is a loving God. We are loved, and there is a purpose to our lives, and all this nonsense that that we are the highest being that we have to be concerned with, and that there's no meaning to our lives. There's no underlying love. There's nothing that binds and connects all of us together. It is all so wrong. It is not the truth. Now, we hope that people who belong to this Satanic Temple can see a better way, that eventually, even though they might be sympathetic to this organization now, that later on they'll see otherwise. We hope and pray for them. We don't wish ill on any of them. But nevertheless, the truth is the truth. Love, kindness, sacrifice, considering the other person first. These are just some things that tell us where the truth lies. And it does not lie with denying Christ, being hostile to symbols of Christ. It does not lie with any of that. And we have to be on our guard against it. And we have to call it out. And hopefully what we've done on this program is make you a little bit more aware of something that is going on around us. So we hope this has been slightly informative. We thank you for listening. We hope you will join us again. And until next time, this has been Ray Gerard. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.